I do a mic check? I would just like to say that the tour buses in this area charge $35 a head to do the tour that you all took last night. So, I have Venmo. Thanks.
Good morning, Chris Bat-Savage. You have your hand raised.
Yeah, good morning. Just checking my microphone.
You sound good, thanks.
Thanks.
Welcome everyone to day 3 of our Mid-Atlantic Council December meeting. I know most of us are anxious to get home, so let's get things started today. We're going to start off with committee reports. First is our SSC report, even though we don't really have a formal report because Dr. Rago has already presented anything or everything. Dr. Rago, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Sure. I'll try to accelerate your desire to get out of here, get out of there. Yeah, just our report is under tab 13. The report also includes a summary of a review that was done for the Northeast Regional Fish Habitat Assessment Program. That review is there. It basically has a few comments about, clarifying definitions, considering alternative spatial scales, trying to incorporate some other survey information, notably NEOMAP and other state surveys as part of the process. And then finally, some recommendations on averaging. It's a 5-page report. It was done jointly with the New England SSC. So just draw your attention to that. I would like to take an opportunity to thank the council for the opportunity to work with all of you and hopefully be useful to your deliberations. Thank the members of the SSC, the council staff, and particularly the center staff, Northeast Fishery Science Center, for their support of our work over the course of the year. Brandon Muffley is the unsung hero of the group, so we appreciate his work as well. And just want to wish you all happy holidays. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Before I get into the executive director's report, I would like to make an announcement that the executive committee met on Tuesday morning and we selected somebody for the Rick E. Savage Award, and we will be presenting that in February. With that, let's go to the executive director's report. Chris Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a number of items behind tab 14 that I'd like to talk about this morning. Not behind the tab is a schedule for our next meeting, which is in February. It's going to be at the Westin Arlington. You've seen the schedule before for 2024, but just to remind you, the dates are February 6th through 8th. We plan to have the council meet on February 6th and 7th. So we'll start on Tuesday, go through Wednesday. And then the council will end Wednesday evening and then start on the 8th with an NTAP meeting. So that'll allow us to overlap with the NTAP folks when they come in on the 7th. If council members want to stick around to hear what's going on with NTAP or attend that NTAP meeting, they'll be welcome to do so as well. So a little unusual arrangement, but we're taking advantage of the fact that we have the space in Arlington and might as well use it. So I think having the NTAP meeting is a good idea. So any questions about that? How that's going to be arranged? Eric?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Moore. So we're expecting a white paper on the survey, the complimentary survey from Dr. Hare on the 12th. Is the plan to address that paper with NTAP on the 8th?
Have to turn to John for the answer to that question. John here.
I have to look at the schedule that they've developed for getting the paper to New England, so I can look at that and then answer.
Well, I'm pretty sure the New England Council is going to address that paper on their meeting on January 30, 31, and the 1st of February. That'd be I have some insight on that, John. Damn little, but some.
Thank you.
So the time that we're going to start on Tuesday is still uncertain. Depends on the number of items we're going to have on the agenda, obviously. One of the items that we will be looking at in February is a public hearing document for that amendment to the Circline Ocean Quahog separation document. Next item behind the tab, I've had some questions about this and maybe a little bit of confusion, is our 2025 council meeting schedule. And even though we're a ways away from 2025, folks are getting confused with February 2025 and February 2024. So we are meeting in person in February 24, Weston, and February of 25, we're not. We're going to be virtually based on the decision that the council made at the last meeting. Okay. So those dates are there for you to put in your calendars, and certainly entertain any questions if you have any. The next item behind the tab is a proposal that we have from the Farning Group. Hopefully folks had a chance to interact with those contractors this week. And I understand that a number of you did have some good conversations with them. We're looking forward to that project and the results of that project that we'll see later in 2024. The next item behind the tab is an agenda for the East Coast Climate Coordination Group. And folks may or may not have heard of the East Coast Climate Coordination Group. It's a new group recently formed as a result of our activities related to the climate change and fisheries issues that we've been dealing with. And certainly the work of that group is going to be important for this council and the other councils on the East Coast, as well as the commission. You can take a look at the document and see who's on that particular group. It includes the executive directors from the councils, John Hare, Mike Petney from Garfo, as well as folks from the Southeast region and the Southeast Fisheries Science Center. So we've started. You can look at any of those items there, see if you have any questions. Again, we're looking forward to at least 2 meetings in 2024. Certainly, if you have any questions, let me know. After we had the meeting of the East Coast Climate Coordination Group, we also went into the NRCC fall meeting that occurred over 2 days in November 8th through 9th. There's a number of action items identified in that document that may be of interest to the council. One of them we talked about yesterday, the did not fish reports. You can see the action item there related to Ken's question about how we're going to handle that. There's also an issue related to blue line tilefish. So the issue there is that blue line tilefish is managed by both the Mid-Atlantic Council and the South Atlantic Council. We manage it independently. Basically, we rely on the Southeast Center to work with the South Atlantic Council to update the assessment for that. We're involved in that assessment, and we're interested in having the Northeast Fisheries Science Center be more involved with that particular assessment, and struggled, I think, over the years to figure out exactly how to do that. But we're continuing to work with the folks at the center, both centers, to make sure that we get the best information we can on blue line tilefish. We also talked about research track assessments, some other things there. Take a look at it. One of the things that we haven't talked about for a while are the operating agreements that we have between the councils and the region and the science center. And we talked about updating those operating agreements. I can't remember. I think it's like the mid 2000s, I think, when the last time we actually had an operating agreement, if I remember correctly. So good idea. And that was something that Kate O'Keefe brought up. I think it's something that we should do. The next item is the port sampling program. So I think folks recognize that the council's been very supportive of helping get more port samples and contributed resources to that particular endeavor. We continue to be concerned about what's going to happen after 2024 when the money is not there to supplement the program. The states have stepped in, including the state of Massachusetts, to start talking about ways that the states may be able to pick up that responsibility. And if you look at the next item behind the tab, it's a letter to Bob from Massachusetts, basically detailing some of the ideas that they have relative to that particular program. And it's from Dan McKernan. So with that, I'm going to stop and see if there's any questions about any of that material before I go on. Okay, moving on. Next time behind the tab, report of the NTAP meeting, working group meeting that occurred on Thursday, November 16th. Number of items there that may be of interest to the council. I can see the agenda and then the summary of what happened during the meeting. This white paper that Eric referenced earlier is detailed here in terms of what that's about. Some other things as well. Any questions about NTAP? Okay, next item behind the tab is the meeting report from the CCC meeting that we had in Arlington in October. Interesting meeting from a number of perspectives. Very detailed summary. So when you get a chance, if you haven't had a chance, take a look at it and look at some of the items that were discussed there, including things like the budget, our budget for 2024, what's going to happen there potentially, and then future 2025, 6, and an update from NOAA Fisheries folks on science. That, but probably from my perspective, one of the more important conversations that we had related to 304F. I know folks are tired of me talking about 304F because we've talked about it probably at every council meeting since last May. But in here is a good summary of what was presented by the NOAA folks, in particular Kelly Dennett. And I basically conveyed our council's feelings relative to 304F, what we thought about the document, and made a motion there that you can see it that recommends that NOAA Fisheries engage the councils and the CCC to develop a revised version of the policy directive to effectively address cross-jurisdictional fisheries governance issues. So the motion was passed. All the councils supported it, and there was no response to that motion from the NIMS folks. I'm not sure why they didn't say anything at the meeting, but my conversations with some of the folks indicate that they are going to address all the comments that they received relative to 304F, and I hope they do. But more importantly, I hope they take us up on our offer to help them revise that procedural directive. Because my perspective, and I think a lot of the others, if you read all the comment letters that we have on 304F, was ill-conceived and poorly developed. Bottom line. And yeah, I'm hoping that, again, that they revise it with our help. One of the other things that we talked about there is IRA money, Inflation Reduction Act money. And you can see, you go through the CCC summary into the next document, the letter. Let's see, let me scroll down here. And there's a lot of stuff there with the CCC meeting. So it's taken me a while to get through it. So there's a, after the CCC stuff, there's a letter to the council executive directors dated October 25th, basically detailing how this is going to work relative to IRA money. And if you read through that particular letter, you can see the details of what we're dealing with relative to our council and all the councils. So basically, the bottom line is that NIMS has set aside $20 million for the councils to basically conduct research related to climate change and fisheries. And what they're very interested in is implementation of fishery management measures or processes necessary to improve climate resiliency and responsiveness to climate impacts, and the development and advancement of climate-related fisheries management planning and implementation efforts, including those in support of underserved communities. And the way that they've decided to basically parse out that money is to give each of the councils, set aside $375,000 for each of the councils to basically have initially, and then another amount, the rest of it, the 17 million, that the councils will have to compete for with different proposals. So we're under a very tight timeline. I'm working closely with Brandon and Kylie to put together the documents that they need by the end of December. And then we have another set of documents that have to go in by the end of January. So I'm not going to read this letter to you, but when you get a chance, take a look at it. We have another document related to that as a supplement. It is a memo that Brandon prepared for me, dated December 11th. And I'm jumping to the supplement section of the briefing book. So there's 5 documents listed as supplements. One of them is this memo. And this, Brandon did a great job summarizing exactly what I just said in terms of the money, in terms of our timeline and the things that we need to do. But more importantly, if you look at that table, table 1, this is the list of anticipated projects and associated costs that we plan to submit. And this is still draft in terms of where we're at with this particular document. And again, we have a couple weeks to polish this up and get it into NIMS to meet our deadline. So what we're thinking about for the 375 are 2 projects. One is a project that we've talked about before related to river herring. It's titled An Operational Forecast to Reduce Bycatch of River Herring in the Midwater Trawl Fishery. So this would be a contract that we would have with the folks who've been involved with before relative to shad and river herring. And, basically, we're looking at a cost there of about $260,000. The rest of the 375, we're going to allocate to SCUP GRAs. So we've had the review that was conducted. We do the SCUP GRA thing this year. And, we've been talking about SCUP GRAs for a long time. And so we had a good review. Now we need to really take a hard look at those and see if there's any reason that we need to change the boxes or the time or not even have GRAs. And one way to do that is with some money and with someone that knows what they're doing. Hopefully we'll be able to do that in 2024. So that's the 375, at least our initial thoughts relative to that amount. And then the rest of it, if you take a look at it, there's 7 other projects that we're proposing. All those add up, everything adds up to 3.5 million, because that's what they asked us to apply for or consider. And, we'll see how it goes. So I'm going to stop there. There's a lot that you could talk about if you want. But again, this is still in play. We have a lot to do. But I think we have a good suite of proposed projects. I'll stop there. Any questions or comments relative to that entire process? Eric?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Moore. It's really just a comment. Some of the councils have been encouraged to work together on projects. You're more likely to succeed in your ask if you're working with other councils. And I know the executive directors on the East Coast have been working together, and I really appreciate that effort. And as far as the competitive nature of it, they said it wasn't all that competitive, but if you take the 17 million and every council is asked to go up to 3.5, that's 28 million bucks. So there's going to be some competition going on there, but I appreciate the fact that you guys are working together on some projects. So thank you.
So thank you, Eric, for that comment. Yeah, if you go down this list, the number of them involve, working with New England and South Atlantic. Probably the one that stands out is the one that says evaluating the data needs and management strategies to support climate-ready fisheries management. So that's a project proposal that we have in draft. Again, largely as a result of Brandon working with Katie Drew from the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. We have that out for review by the other executive directors, and we'll see where that takes us. But that's basically a year project that potentially could be a game changer for us. One of the things I should say is that we have a meeting scheduled in early January. I can't remember when, Mike, like the second week of January, I think. Yeah, the 11th of January, to meet with the NIST folks to talk about these projects and basically see if there's anything that we've missed or doesn't make sense to them before we get to the end of January when we actually have to submit the package. Other questions?
I was going to basically say exactly what Eric did and then also mention the call on the 11th. So
Read your mind. Okay, anything else on IRA funding? So stay tuned. We'll let you know how this goes. Certainly you'll see once we have these packages done and ready to submit, make sure the council has a chance to look at them. Yes. Okay, and I'll stop there and see if there's any other questions. Mike, do you have a question?
yeah, just a comment or more of a comment, I guess, because you went through stuff pretty quick on the CCC meeting. You noted obviously the concern that councils have around the 304F. What I hope didn't get missed in that is that there should be significant concern and attention paid to the NEPA issue, the NEPA changes. So for everybody sort of not following this stuff as closely as some of us have to, when Congress passed, make sure I get this right, the not the Consolidated Appropriations Act. That was the right whale thing. 1 second here, sorry. Fiscal Responsibility Act. Included in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, they made several changes to NEPA, to the law. And those changes to the law imposed some page limits and some time limits that had previously been issued by CEQ through regulation, or proposed regulation. And it limits environmental assessments to 75 pages and EISs to 150 pages. More importantly, I think it limits the development time from initiation of an action to signing the FONSI for environmental assessment to 1 year. And the notice of availability, the notice of intent to prepare an EIS to signing the record of decision, 2 years. Unlike the regulations that CEQ issued, the law does not provide waivers or exemptions. So as I think most of you hopefully recognize, the Magnuson Act process and the NEPA process are tightly intertwined within the council process. And the agency relies on the council process to serve as the basis and the backbone of the NEPA process in many ways, preparing the document, public engagement, development of a range of alternatives, and doing all of that consideration. If we don't figure out a way to address the changes in the Fiscal Responsibility Act in a meaningful way, there is the risk that the two processes could be completely severed. So that the council would develop a Magnuson Act action and document and then hand it to the agency, who would then develop a NEPA document. Well, that adds theoretically 2 years, for example, from the time the council prepares an amendment till when the agency can implement it, and a year to issue for an environmental assessment. Well, if we're doing specifications, we're doing framework adjustments that we want to get implemented quickly, we don't have another year to implement from the time the council completes its action. So I encourage the council to pay particular attention to this issue. I believe one of the outcomes of the CCC meeting was the CCC to form a work group to look at this issue and develop some guidelines and recommendations for the agency. I'd encourage the Mid-Atlantic to stay very engaged in that and to, be paying close attention so that you have advice and recommendations for how to ensure that the Magnuson and NEPA process stay, together and working through the council process. I think, we've talked about this a lot internally in regional office. And we think that there's the benefits of the integrated NEPA Magnuson process far outweigh any benefits that we would see from severing the two processes just to meet these timelines. So I encourage you to pay particular attention to that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I went through that summary, the CCC meeting summary, very quickly. But again, I think it is an important summary for folks to review. There's a number of other items in there as well that you may find of interest. And I agree with Mike in terms of the importance of that conversation related to NEPA. In fact, was the person that made the motion at the CCC meeting to form a CCC work group to deal with the issue. So once we have the documents and the things that we need to start those meetings, that work group meet in early 2024, get going on a number of activities related to that particular issue. Any other questions before we move on? Yeah. Michelle.
Thanks, Chris. Just and so thank you, Mike, for reviewing the piece of the report with respect to NEPA changes. I had a few questions about that, so thank you. And then the other thing I had a question about was the climate work group. And it wasn't clear to me how that work group is interfacing with the climate change scenario planning process that the three councils have been involved in.
So you're talking about the climate coordination work group, the higher level one? Is that another group?
I'm looking at something that says climate work group, where Ryan Rendon of the Gulf Council staff presented a handout compiled by the CCC's climate change work group to solicit feedback on questions, and their purpose is to develop a common understanding and voice among the councils on capacity, future needs, blah, blah, blah. How does that interface with the scenario planning stuff?
So that was a work group formed for the CCC. Came up as a result of conversations we were having around the table, and was proposed by the North Pacific Council that we form that work group. We decided, I think maybe, hopefully in the summary it indicates, that we basically have asked those folks to kind of put them on the shelf for a little bit as we work through a number of items. So I'm not expecting that particular work group is going to be doing a lot related to climate change and fisheries. It isn't directly related to the scenario planning stuff that we were involved with at all. Yeah, so it's just a separate group. And it's tough. I mean, I'm losing track because we have a climate coordination group. We have this other climate group CCC proposed. We have another group that's supporting the climate coordination group. And yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces. Just trying to keep it all straight. Other questions? Okay. Somebody's ready to go.
Yeah. All right.
Gotta go. So the next item behind the tab is the New York Bite Developers Digest. I think, Michelle, you asked that this be included in the tab, if I remember correctly. Is this yours? So do you want to talk about it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just quickly, I think most folks around the table know that a contract that I have right now is working as a fisheries liaison for one of the New York Bight offshore wind projects. And so one of the things that I think both, BOEM and fisheries have emphasized is coordination among offshore wind developers in providing information to fisheries participants and other stakeholders. And so this is the second of a New York Bight Developers Digest, we're calling it. So basically sort of a topic-based newsletter that we're trying to put together several times per year. So this was the second one, and this one is focused on potential opportunities that, fishermen may be interested in that, might complement their existing harvesting activities. So it's just a 2-pager reviewing what those are. Happy to chat with anyone afterwards about that. And then the final page of it is really just it's a map of all the different existing lease areas with the contact information for the fisheries liaison. So appreciate Chris, you and Julia allowing that to be included. I know a lot of folks go to the jointly maintained Mid-Atlantic Council offshore wind page for information. And so just thought it was appreciated the ability to be able to put this out there for folks' information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next item behind the tab relates to 304F. Mary put together this excellent summary of where we're at with everything that happened relative to the comments that were received by NOAA Fisheries, including ours, obviously. So I'm not going to read this memo to you, but if you note the highlighted sections, you can find our comments on the procedural directive. You can look at the CCC comments on the procedural directive. You can look at the other comments that we received from the other councils, including New England, South Atlantic, Western Pacific. You can take a look at the public webinar summary that we hosted on October 16th, get some additional comments relative to 304F. And then there was several letters that were sent in from our industry partners, including Seafreeze, Sea-Watch, and Lunds, relative to 304F as well. If you take a look at all those comments, you'd be hard pressed to find anybody that liked what NIMS put together. So again, we remain concerned about 304F. One of the documents that I asked Mary to put together, thinking about some of the things that we might have to talk about in the future, are talking points. And I asked her to put them together not only for me, but also for you. So there's a supplemental 1-pager that's titled Talking Points Draft 304F Procedural Directive. And these talking points are straightforward, talk about our concerns, talk about the fact that we're here to help. In fact, they decide to revise that procedural directive. And again, I'm not going to read it to you, but I think pretty straightforward. Any questions or comments about any of that? So let's see, there's the letter. So the letter is behind the tab if you want to see the letter. I think that's pretty much it for the tab. In terms of the supplements, the supplemental items, let's talk about one of my favorite species, sturgeon. So, and when I say let's us talk about sturgeon, I'm going to turn to Jason to talk about sturgeon. So hopefully Jason is online and hears me. And now's your opportunity, Jason, to talk about the update that you provided to the council. It's a couple pager entitled Sturgeon Bycatch Framework Update, dated December 23. And Jason, if you can hear us, now's your chance.
Yep. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. I think the main thing is that given where we are now, it seems really challenging to complete this action by April if agency time availability in the next 2 months is kind of similar to the last 6. Since we don't have a final list of alternatives or a final way to analyze them, this is more where we'd usually be like before framework meeting 1, maybe 6 to 8 months before final action, especially since area-based measures in this action are often challenging to analyze. We have about 41 working days to wrap things up, less for folks who are taking any leave. So if the FMAT can trim up alternatives in the next week or 2, and maybe if we get some more analytical availability from the agency, then and it sounds like we might. It's not impossible, but we're not where we'd typically be for a pending decision on a framework of this nature. So we've had a number of meetings this week, kind of staff to staff discussions, more in the next couple. The agency, so from kind of my staff perspective, it seems like if we can really trim things up, there's a potential, but because of the higher bycatch estimates, I think the agency potentially wants us to expand and consider additional alternatives, which I think would really throw off the timeline. So anyway, there's definitely some more uncertainty on this action, and we're trying to work with agency staff right now to figure out if there's a way to push this through, but there are some definite challenges. So just wanted to make the council aware kind of where we stand right now.
So Jason jumped right into our reaction to the recommendations that we received from Garfo. That's attached to his memo in case you want some more background. Basically, new estimates show that the bycatch Atlantic sturgeon and gillnet gear exceeds the level exempted in the incidental take statement of the 2021 batch fisheries biological opinion, which basically resulted in given the new information, we have to work with the service to develop measures to reduce that take. So I know that, Mike, you had some comments that you wanted to make relative to sturgeon. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Chris and Mr. Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this at the last couple of meetings, how, you know, as the information came through and as we were analyzing it and I guess wrapping our heads around what the information and what the take numbers were indicating, that the reductions needed were substantial. You know, recall that the original purpose of this framework adjustment when it was initiated probably a year ago was to respond to a term and condition from the 2021 biological opinion that just said councils should by 2024 develop measures to reduce bycatch of sturgeon in the gillnet, in the, you know, large mesh gillnet fisheries. And so how much wasn't specified. That was the term and condition of the old BIOP. That old BIOP set the incidental take statement that authorized the fisheries to continue operating under the Endangered Species Act. And what we discovered last year and briefed the council in the fall, I believe it was the fall, a few meetings ago, was that the fishery had exceeded the incidental take statement by a substantial amount. And so the nature of the framework adjustment changed from that point. The nature of the framework changed from simply implementing measures to reduce by some amount bycatch in those fisheries to reducing enough that we were no longer in jeopardy and could or would not pose jeopardy to the species and could move forward with a fishery covered by the Endangered Species Act. And at the same time, we needed to reinitiate consultation and develop a new biological opinion. So we talked about a couple of different strategies for doing that. One strategy would have been that we did a biological opinion on the information that we had at the time, and the action being the fisheries as they have been operating. And then any reasonable and prudent alternatives or measures that came out of that biological opinion, we would then hand to the council to implement through a fishery management action. The risk there is there was a strong likelihood that that would have resulted in a jeopardy opinion. And so the council's hands would have been tied. So the alternative approach, given that the councils had already initiated and were working on this framework adjustment, was to wait on the biological opinion, take the new action, whatever comes out of this framework adjustment, whatever measures are part of that, analyze that as the baseline, and write a biological opinion based on the action being whatever comes out of this framework adjustment. And then then that would result in, presumably, hopefully, I think the target that we all had was result in a non-jeopardy opinion, and we could move forward safely. At the time that we were discussing those strategies, we did not have the percent reduction that would be necessary to ensure that we could avoid jeopardy. So it was a little bit of a shooting in the dark in terms of developing the initial range of alternatives. We knew time and area closures, and that's what the council's both sort of focused on, time and area closures versus gear changes and other things, soak times, things like that. The time and area closures seem to be the best opportunity to reduce those takes. And we were working from the information we had at the time, which was the hotspot analysis that had gone into the original document that was required by the 2021 buyout. So we now have updated information, which allowed us to present the information that Jason summarized, that the takes are such that we need a 68% reduction in takes. So where we're coming from, the regional office, in looking at this action, we still are optimistic that the councils have the time to make some changes, some modifications or refinements to the time and area closures that were already agreed to in the document in the past couple of meetings. With some slight, with some changes, maybe some expansions in time, we could achieve the 68% reduction that is necessary. And so, Jason mentioned this complicates things. I question whether it adds uncertainty. I think what we're trying to do is add certainty to this. We know what the target is, and we have information that we can work with staff to, draw the boxes and identify the months that would need to be closed in order to achieve that. What we are looking for is agreement from the council that there is enough flexibility in the process that within the framework of time and area closures, that the PDT, the FMAT, has the flexibility to work with our staff to refine those boxes and refine the months to achieve the reductions that are necessary. If the councils are unable to do that, and we'll have to analyze this in the biological opinion, we run the risk of the council taking an action in the spring that doesn't go quite far enough. Then we do a biological opinion in the fall, and we still have more reductions that are necessary. And then we have to go through either the process again with the councils, or we have to do something unilaterally through secretarial authority. So the hope is that we can utilize the process we currently have between now and say the February meeting, refine those alternatives, come back to you with some more specific time and area closures that we have a higher confidence will achieve the reductions necessary. And then the council can act on those and then hopefully take final action in April. So that was a lot, Mr. Chair. Chris, I'll pause and see if there's any reactions or questions.
Jason?
Thanks for that additional clarification. I think in terms of uncertainty, I was mostly referring to kind of timing. We haven't been able to analyze any of the alternatives yet and don't have a method, haven't been able to come to a method to do that. I'm hoping in the next week or two we're able to do that. And then we'll see what kind of reductions we get from the initial alternatives. So it's possible we come back, the only ways to achieve a 68%, maybe it's small changes. But again, not having been able to analyze any of the impacts of any of the alternatives so far, it's possible that it's drastic changes to alternatives that the council would see in February for final action. And normally we kind of dealing with some small tweaks at framework meeting 2 for final action and try to really, normally we have like the alternatives pretty much set framework meeting 1. So the uncertainty that I see as staff is just, more on the timing and being able to facilitate final action by April. But but a lot of it's going to depend on kind of FMAT outcomes and analyses over the next couple of weeks. So we'll have more input soon.
Thanks, Jason. Chris?
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Mike and Jason, for the update on this. I think we're all still trying to process the magnitude of what we're looking at. Reading the document, it looks like the take estimates were higher with the new CAMS system of estimating bycatch. Did that system reveal any other areas, other hotspots of concern for sturgeon bycatch, or is it still mostly the areas that we talked about in previous meetings?
Yeah, from looking at the data that I've seen, it appears to me that the hotspots are basically the exact same ones. There might be a slight difference or a slight change in the scaling within those. But the general areas that we were looking at initially, there was one area off southern New England, and then 3 areas off the Mid-Atlantic, I believe, 3 or 4 smaller areas off the Mid-Atlantic. Those are generally the same hotspots, but the scaling is a little bit different.
Okay, thanks. And just a quick follow-up question. I see Jason's hands up too. And just as a reminder, I should know this, but since this is a federal action, we are looking at reducing in federal waters only. But are we going to be able to attain that 68% reduction by just doing time area closures and gear modifications in federal waters, or will we need the help of ASMFC to get measures in place in state waters where sturgeon bycatch is occurring?
That's a great question, Chris. It looks to me that in order to achieve the full 68% reduction, we need action both in state waters and federal waters.
Okay, thank you. Eric?
Thank you, Dr. Moore. So speaking of ASMMC, they're scheduled to do a sturgeon stock assessment update in 2024, and the results of that are going to be known late summer, early fall. Now, of course, those things can go a lot of ways. They can go, stock is improved, it's not improved, you know how that goes. So how is that information going to play into this mess that we have?
So anything that's available at the time that we write the biological opinion will be incorporated into the biological opinion as available information. So if the stock assessment is complete and available, that will be reviewed and used in the preparation of an analysis for the biological opinion. It also would be used as an important component of the next 5-year review. So under the Endangered Species Act, we do a review every 5 years to confirm or modify the status, either as endangered or threatened, or it's met the criteria to come off the list. The last 5-year review for sturgeon was done and completed, I believe, last year in 2022. So we would not be looking to start another 5-year review for at least a few years. It does take some time to complete those, but hopefully that will be used in the BIOP and it'll be used in the next 5-year review.
Joe?
Yeah, thanks. I'm curious, I keep hearing time and area closures mentioned, but I'm assuming that soak times are still a possibility.
Yeah, I would actually defer to Jason. I believe that councils may have removed those from the list of alternatives given enforcement concerns, but Jason would know that.
Jason?
I think there are still some were removed, I think. I think there's still some gear related things in there. The uncertainty on what amount of reduction of either take or mortality you get from those is highly uncertain, and the FMAT is discussing, how to estimate what benefit in terms of achieving, some part of, some percentage reduction, some of the different gear provisions might lead to.
Joe?
Thanks, Chris. Just to follow up, and I guess it's not just that, but I was kind of surprised yesterday during our spiny dogfish rather lengthy discussion that we didn't discuss the interactions with what will be happening here and the potential for reducing discards in the dogfish fishery as they deal with these issues.
Okay, thank you. Bob Beal?
Thanks, Chris. Just to follow up on Chris Savage's question and comment about state waters. The commission has been tracking this and in our action plan for 2024 is a possible addendum. If the time and area closures extend into state waters for spiny dogfish or any other species, or gear modifications extend into state waters, the commission plans to develop a complementary action that will be consistent across the full range of these species. So it is in our work plan. We are planning on following this up.
Thank you. John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When you brought this up to state waters, that really got my attention. Since the sturgeon were listed under the ESA, where states were told that for their fisheries, they should get a Section 10. And like many states, we don't have one. I know that's pretty common here. So you're saying that the impact of this would be beyond just federal waters fisheries, that states would have to get their own Section 10s to comply with this, or this action would actually be a blanket to states also? So states would have to take complementary action regardless of whether they were permitted under a Section 10 permit.
Yeah, when you get into Section 10 permits, you're outside of my sphere of knowledge. So I'm not exactly sure how those interact with this process for Section 7. But the consultation, Section 7 consultation is on the federal fisheries. But just like with, well, maybe you all aren't as keenly aware as others, but the lobster issue in Gulf of Maine, for example, we're consulting on the federal waters lobster fishery, and we need a 80% or 90% reduction in risk. We can't achieve that alone in federal waters, so we need the state partners to work with us on that. So this is a similar situation where looking at the take, the hot spots, start at the beach and run out. And so if we only implement closures in starting at 3 miles and out on the federally permitted fisheries, we may not achieve the full reduction necessary because of all the takes that are occurring between the beach and 3 miles, right in those hotspots. And so complementary measures by the states to implement similar time and area closures so that those run from the beach to the edge of the hotspot would ensure that we achieve the 68% reduction overall without it being entirely on the back of the federal waters fishery, of federally permitted vessels.
If I could just follow up on that, I mean, there's a lot going on, of course. I know, like you're already having to consider whether to separate out the Delaware River population from the New York Bight population with sturgeon. And I know when our state water gillnet fisheries occur that there are sturgeon around. So I'm like I said, I'm just curious at this point how this would tie into what has been up till now, I thought, just kind of almost a separate issue, is to leave it to the states to look to Section 10 permits for their take of sturgeon in state water fisheries.
Jason?
Just a couple follow-ups. I think related to something I think Chris asked, the hotspots analyses were based on really basic analyses of just raw observations and observer data. So that won't change at all, because the CAMS is really just changing the kind of catch and effort data that goes into kind of the official bycatch estimates. And then I think the areas that the FMAT is currently looking at for the areas the councils would set extend, into state waters. But like lots of other actions, the council's actions follow federal permits. So I think it'd be spiny dogfish and monkfish permits into state waters, but not state only permits. So the areas that I've been seeing discussed at FMAT, they go into state waters, but you're not going to get the full kind of benefit of them unless the state / the commission adopts something complementary. But I believe the areas that the councils will see next, they go into state waters. It's just that they can only affect the federal permit when they're in state waters, not the state only permit.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Other comments around the table? Seeing none. James Fletcher?
Hopefully you can hear me.
We can hear you.
My question is, between who would be responsible for an enhancement program to build sturgeon back? The Mid-Atlantic Council has no facilities to do enhancement. The states have some facilities, but there was a documentary a few days ago on some television of sturgeon worldwide showing that the population is being increased through enhancement. And the other question that comes in, does NOAA, National Marine Fisheries, U.S. Fish and Wildlife have enough financial backing to look at paying the fishermen not to fish in these areas? If we're going to stop them from fishing in this area, is there money for compensation for them not to fish? Because we have the landings and trip reports over the last number of years. If we want to stop them in an area, and take some of the council money too, make all of the agencies that are responsible for this pay the fishermen not to fish, or put the fishermen on their payrolls. Whatever you want to do, we do it for the farmers and wildlife and ducks, not to do certain things. My question to Mike is, has anything like that been looked at for saving the sturgeon? Thank you.
Mike?
Not as far as I'm aware, no.
Thank you. Bonnie Brady?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Great. Bonnie Brady, Long Island Commercial Fishing Association. I want to make sure that I heard this correctly. I know that Mr. Reed had spoken of a stock assessment in next year, but that a buy-up would not take place until 2027. So what happens if it turns out that the assessment shows that not only are they not endangered, but they may not even be threatened in any of their distinct population segments? We have fishermen throughout Long Island that have seen quite a resurgence in sturgeon in general. And if you have the information that shows the stock is no longer threatened or endangered, would you still be continuing those type of restrictive actions upon various federal waters fisheries?
Yeah, sorry if I wasn't clear, Bonnie. The biological opinion that we're talking about, we anticipate being completed next year, so 2024.
Okay, but then are you taking into account the ASMFC stock assessment? I thought maybe I misconstrued that.
Yeah, so the stock assessment, once the stock assessment is done before we complete the biological opinion, we'll incorporate that into the biological opinion. But I also mentioned that following the biological opinion, which will be done in 2024, there will be the next 5-year review of sturgeon following on, presumably to be completed in 2027. But we start that, well in advance of that date. And that would definitely take into account most recent stock assessments and any other information between the time that we complete the biological opinion and when we complete the 5-year review.
So maybe you could tease that out for me. So you have the biological opinion and then you have the 5-year review. What happens if the biological opinion shows everything's fine, everything's great? What happens as far as in the restrictions put upon various gillnet fishermen? Does that go away? Is there an emergency ruling? What happens then? Thank you.
John's over there, but I'll speak for what the attorneys would say. I think is it depends. If the conclusion of the biological opinion is given the measures that are in place, everything is fine, then it would be a sort of non-jeopardy opinion, and we'd move forward assuming that those measures continue. If the biological opinion reaches a different conclusion, I think what you're getting at is what if the biological opinion concludes that the stock has met its, we'll call it a rebuilding target for sake of consistency, and is no longer threatened or endangered? What do we do then? That I don't know the ins and outs of the nuances of how the ESA process works, but I can try to figure that out by January for the New England Council meeting. But I believe it would trigger another review where we would go through rulemaking to change the status. So I think hopefully that at least gets you enough information for now.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other comments, questions before we move on? So I think everyone knows that Carson had her baby. Carson was my sturgeon person. Obviously, Jason Didden is now my sturgeon person, on top of being my spiny dogfish, squidback, butterfish guy, and other stuff. So we are struggling a bit in terms of staff responsibilities, but certainly, sturgeon is important, and Jason's ready and willing to take on that particular activity, and I appreciate it, Jason. Thank you. Anything else? Okay, next topic, wind. And we talk about wind at each one of our council meetings now because you all asked that we do that. And for each one of the council meetings, we have a summary that's prepared by Julia for you all to look at. That summary is behind the tab. It includes a reference to a comment letter that we submitted in November. You can link to that if you want to read that letter if you haven't had a chance yet. We also, she also notes that 3 offshore wind projects were approved by BOEM, and there's the links to those, including Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind, Revolution Wind, and Empire Wind. One of the things that I continue to wonder about and ask Julie about quite a bit is the fisheries compensation aspect of wind. And we've been waiting for BOEM to release the mitigation guidance. They haven't yet. There's also a state-led initiative that Joe is very familiar with. If you're interested in talking to him about that, that's ongoing. So we're in a wait and see position for that particular issue. Big news related to Ørsted ceasing development of 2 projects off the coast of New Jersey. Haven't heard about that. You can read about that. There are new and upcoming power purchase agreements that are being considered or in play. Take a look there at those. In October, BOEM announced a draft wind energy area in the Gulf of Maine. There was also some testing of suction bucket foundation by Beacon Wind. There's more information there for that. There is a note there about NOAA and the Community Offshore Wind partnering on environmental monitoring program. Read that. Ongoing construction, those projects there, as well as ongoing survey activities you can read about there. And we have fishery liaisons that reach out to folks to keep us well informed of what's going on with everything wind. And we also have a wind page that we work with New England Council on and update it as new material or new topics or new issues become available. So there is an additional, because we don't have enough wind stuff to talk about, there's an additional supplemental document that you should look at as well. And these happened relatively recently. We have proposed sale notice for 2 lease areas off of Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. You can look at the information there. The public comment period is open through February of 2024. We also have final environmental impact statement for Sunrise Wind. And there's been consideration of additional potential wind energy areas off of Maryland. And with that, Mr. Chair, I am done. Any questions or comments about any of that or anything else that we've talked about this morning? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Before we move on to organizational reports, let's take a 10-minute break so people can finish checking out and all that. So let's make it a 9-minute break. We'll come back at 10:15. All right, welcome back, everyone. Let's get started on our organizational reports. NOAA Fisheries Greater Atlantic Regional Office, Mike Pentney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll run through a few items and then be happy to take questions if there's anything of interest. So first thing I want to talk about is the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument. Shortly after the council's last meeting on October 20th, we published our proposed rule to incorporate the commercial fishing prohibition associated with the monument into our Magnuson Act regulations. So as everybody, I think, remembers, the presidential proclamations establishing the monument prohibited commercial fishing within the monument for all fisheries, and that was effective for most fisheries when the proclamations were made, and then for deep sea red crab and lobster as of September 15th of this year. So what we proposed simply adds the coordinates that define the boundaries of the monument to the definitions section of the 600 series of regs. So not our regional regs, but the national regs. And then in the prohibition section of that, of those regulations, we acknowledged the commercial fishing is prohibited, but clarified that transiting the area with gear stowed is allowed. The comment period for that proposed rule closed on November 20th, and we anticipate getting a final rule out sometime 2024. On September 26th, we published a proposed rule proposing a habitat area of particular concern offshore of southern New England. This was recommended by the New England Council within and around proposed wind lease areas and Cox Ledge. This area is very important habitat for cod spawning, as well as for other council-managed species that utilize and rely on complex benthic habitats. We received 14 comments on the action, and the final rule is being developed, which we expect sometime in early 2024. But we're currently using the designation as an HAPC when we do our EFH consultations, particularly on the wind projects. On November 16th, we published a proposed rule for bluefish, proposing the catch specifications for 2024 and 2025, consistent with the council's recommendations. As you recall, the recent research track and management track assessments of bluefish determined that the stock is no longer overfished, and overfishing is not occurring, but it's not yet rebuilt. So the proposed specifications decrease the 2024 ABC consistent with the council's SSC recommendation, reduce it to 17.48 million pounds with a commercial quota of 2.42 million pounds and a recreational harvest limit of 11.96 million pounds. No changes to any of the management measures for either sector were proposed. The final rule, we expect the final rule to publish very soon in time for the start of the fishing year on January 1st. We also published a proposed rule, and we talked about this the other day, on November 17th for the proposed summer flounder, scup, and black sea bass specifications. And we also noted in that rule, that proposed rule, that we were considering removing the January 1 through April 30th closure for recreational scup fishing. The comment period for that closed on December 2nd, and we submitted the rule to headquarters yesterday, the final rule. So we expect that to publish by January 1st. On October 13th, we published a temporary rule, and we talked about this as well yesterday, with interim measures to reduce Atlantic mackerel catch for the remainder of the 2023 fishing year and the beginning of the 2024 fishing year. This implemented the council recommended 20,000 pound possession limit for limited access permit holders and 5,000 pound for open access permit holders. We intend for these limits to remain in place until we finalize and publish the 2024 specifications following our review of the council's recommendations that were made yesterday. So recall under the Magnuson Act, when we publish an interim rule such as this, which is akin to an emergency rule, it's good for 186 days, and then it can be renewed for another 180 days. So the initial period would expire in April. So ideally, we'll have this council's action finalized and implemented before that the current temporary rule expires, and we can just simply replace it with the rule resulting from the council's work. If there's a delay, we would extend and renew our temporary rule until we're able to get the council's action implemented. To us, related to surf clam and ocean quahog on Georges Bank, we talked about this briefly at the last council meeting, where we were made aware that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, is requesting that we remove the Georges Bank paralytic shellfish poisoning closure area that has prohibited fishing for surf clams and ocean quahogs in a large portion of Georges Bank, and that closure has been in place for quite a long time. But as a result of changes to the National Shellfish Sanitation Program, FDA is asking us to remove that closure because of the improved biotoxin monitoring and management program that the FDA is working through their program. The NOAA's Seafood Inspection Program is working with the FDA on an expanded role for biotoxin monitoring. So we would be looking to open that area under our own secretarial authority, not through a council action. However, we've heard from the New England Council of some concerns related to the potential impacts of opening that on the scallop resource, especially given that since we initiated the closure, the New England Council, as you know, has developed and implemented a rotational area management program for their sea scallop fishery. And so we intend to look at that very closely before we take action. So once we are ready to propose develop a proposed rule, we'll work with the councils. We won't go through the councils, but we'll certainly engage with and communicate with the councils to ensure that we have all the information we need to understand the potential impacts. And I can skip a few of these, jumping down to cooperative research issues. I just wanted to note that also related to scallops, we received 23 applications in response to the 2024 Scallop Research Set-Aside Notice of Funding Opportunity. This closed on October 23rd, and those 23 proposals are under review for technical merit and management relevance. And then in early 2024, we'll make final selections and announce those projects. Under the agency's bycatch reduction engineering program, we are also accepting applications for the 2024 notice of funding opportunity. Pre-proposals for that are actually due today. So if you have any great ideas for bycatch reduction engineering programs or projects, please get your pre-proposals in today. And then full proposals will be due March 20th of 2024. And there's approximately $2.3 million available to support successful applicants in that program this year. So that's all I have today, Mr. Chairman, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions or comments for Mike? I see none. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the NOAA Fisheries Northeast Fisheries Science Center. Dr. John here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. A couple of things to go through today. We're still on a continuing resolution, which expires February 2nd. And so our funding is still uncertain. And as we've talked about here, increasing funding around port sampling is also uncertain, but we have requested additional funds. In terms of the surveys, the autumn bottom trawl survey completed on November 17th. 335 of the 360 representative stations were completed, and all survey strata were sampled. We did send weekly email updates to New England Council Executive Director, to Chris, Mid-Atlantic Council Executive Director, and to Bob, ASMFC Executive Director, in an effort to improve our communications around survey operations. And we also provided monthly emails to the Northeast Trawl Advisory Panel. This was the 60th year of the Fall Bottom Trawl Survey, which is quite an accomplishment. That survey is an important part of our stock assessment and management processes in the region, and also serves as a foundational scientific data set for many studies in the region, particularly those looking at the effects of climate change on fisheries. We do release sort of our quick survey summary, and that will be released soon, and we'll share that link with the executive director so he can distribute it to the council so you can see survey coverage for that survey. We also have released, it was more relevant last week at New England, but just want everyone here to know, we released a sources sought announcement to identify vessels interested in being chartered for the Northeast Fisheries Sea Scallop Survey. Two different sources sought announcements were released. One was looking for vessels that were interested in being chartered for the Northeast Fisheries Science Center dredge survey. And the other was sources sought for vessels interested in being chartered for the Northeast Fisheries Science Center HabCam survey and or the fiber optic winch, which could be used on the HabCam survey. And so these announcements will be followed by contract solicitations, which will be made in the new year. And to apply for the contract, you need to be registered in the government sam.gov data system. And if there's interest, I can forward the email that I forwarded to Dr. O'Keefe that really lays out how to register in that sam.gov system. Finally, on the survey front, we did suspend our northern shrimp survey for the 2024 season. ASMFC has a moratorium on the fishery. And so looking at our priorities and looking at sort of our funding to continue a survey for a fishery which is no longer being executed. And there is some likelihood that the fishery could come back, but there's certainly no indication that the fishery could come back. We've decided to suspend that survey, and we'll continue to track the situation with ASMFC in the future and see if there's reason to start it back up. It is going to affect some of our other stock assessments. I believe that data goes into 8 other stock assessments, all New England Fisheries Management Council managed species. The impacts, it's a relatively minor data set in those other assessments, but there are going to be some minor impacts. In terms of the Northeast Trawl Advisory Panel, we have been, as we have talked about here, we are drafting a white paper to frame industry-based trawl survey that is complementary to the Northeast Fisheries Science Center Bigelow survey. That white paper was discussed at NTAP working group meeting on November 2nd. Comments sort of were due back from the group on the 10th, and the intent is to then provide that white paper to the New England Council and Mid-Atlantic Council and ASMFC by January 12th. So we are on track and working closely with NTAP in the development of that. In terms of observer updates, the 2023 SBRM year, which runs from April 1st, 2023 to March 31st, 2024, we're at approximately a 74% accomplishment rate for the fisheries part of that standardized bycatch reduction methodology, and approximately a 61% accomplishment rate for the Marine Mammal Protection Act component of that methodology. We've started working to do the standardized bycatch reduction methodology for 2024, and there has been an SBRM 3-year review team joint FMAP PDT between Mid-Atlantic and New England Council, Northeast Fisheries Science Center, and that group is working on the technical memo. In terms of assessments, the black sea bass peer review was last week, and everything I've heard was that peer review went well. We do need to wait for the review panel to submit their comments back to the agency. And there were some questions that came up at the end regarding data sensitivities, and so that we'll have to wait and see what the peer review panel sort of says to us as advice with regards to that. We also, again, it's a New England sort of issue, but I did want to just let this council know. Science Center identified a data issue in one of the 4 new COD research track assessments. In one of the assessments, Georges Bank COD, the Bigelow and Albatross time series that was included in the assessment was not, they did not include the calibration. The error was first noticed by Canadian scientists when they were looking at the assessment. When the center became aware of it, we let the New England Council know. We then sort of worked through the error and provided a memo to the New England Council prior to their meeting, and we will plan to give updates to them going forward. The reason to mention it here is, we continue to work on our communication and continue to work on our transparency around sort of scientific activities in the center. And we will, continue to, be transparent about this data issue and the COD assessment. The research track assessments, as we know, are not used in setting management specifications. So this error will be reviewed as part of the COD management track coming up this year, and then the management specifications will be set. Looking at sort of cooperative research, there are the Cooperative Research Summit, which is going to be February 5th in Cape May, New Jersey. Registration for that summit closes on December 22nd. I can share the link with the executive director so he can distribute it if there's interest here, or if you know people who would be interested. We have also held stakeholder workshops throughout the region to look at pilot hook and line survey. The West Coast uses a recreational hook and line survey for index development for some of the rockfish assessments. And the Science Center is interested in that as an approach potentially to continue survey activities in wind energy areas, either fixed or floating. So we had a number of workshops. That information is being consolidated and will be used to inform field work, which is planned in the Gulf of Maine, Southern New England, and Mid-Atlantic for the spring of 2024. The squid biological sampling program also continues. It was initiated in May 2023, working closely with the council. So far, over 7,300 squid have been sampled to date. Intent is to have this information inform the longfin squid research track, which is just getting started now. Protected species, we've heard about the sturgeon issue already, so I won't go into that. In terms of North Atlantic right whale, we did release a preliminary estimate for the number of North Atlantic right whales in existence at the beginning of 2022. That estimate is approximately 360 animals. The sharp downward trajectory that we had been seeing for a number of years, one could argue that it has slowed, which is a good sign. Believe that that's because of the increased calving that we have seen over the past couple of years. So we'll keep a close eye on the calving rate. And with that update, the population and the abundance estimate is done every year. So we will be updating that again in the fall. And I think, Mr. Chair, I will stop there and happy to take any questions.
Any questions, comments for John? I do not see any. Thank you very much. You can shut your mic off too. Let's move on to no office of general counsel. John Almeida.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first case I'm going to update the council on is the challenge to the Mid-Atlantic's commercial quota allocation amendment. This was a case brought by the state of New York. You may recall that NIMS won in the district court in this case, and New York appealed to the Second Circuit. Since our last meeting on October 13th, Friday the 13th, the Second Circuit issued a decision affirming district court ruling in favor of NIMS. And earlier this month, the Second Circuit issued its mandate, meaning that time for additional review had passed. So basically, this case is done. So this will be the last update on that New York challenge to the summer flounder commercial allocation amendment. Another case of interest to this council, the NRDC, Natural Resources Defense Council case challenging the Mid-Atlantic's recreational harvest control rule framework. That case is in the middle of merits briefing. Plaintiffs filed their opening brief. NIMS will file its cross motion for summary judgment on December 20th, so next week. And this case should be fully briefed on the merits by February 16th. This case has been brought in the District of Columbia, and we'll see if the court wants to have oral argument after it gets all the papers in mid-February. This is a case I reported on at the last meeting, the New England Fishermen's Stewardship Association case. This challenges the New England Council action, the Groundfish Framework 65 action. But it's of interest in that the nature of this case is another appointments clause challenge. This is a constitutional claim going to the nature of the council system, frankly, whether the members of the council have satisfied or are in violation of the Constitution's appointments clause. You may recall we've had another case brought against an action by this council raising a similar argument. That's the Lofstad case on the rec commercial allocation amendment. This case raises very similar arguments, and it goes to a New England Council action. The case is brought in the District of Maine, and it is currently in the middle of merits briefing, which will be completed by January 10th under the current schedule. Turning to right whale litigation, which is another regular topic on my update. In the Maine Lobstermen Association case, you may remember this one was an industry case challenging the 2021 fisheries biological opinion with regard to the lobster fishery and right whales. NIMS won in the district court. The plaintiffs went to the DC Circuit, who reversed and sent the case back. Since our last meeting, basically the mandate came back to the district court, and the district court issued an order basically closing the case and implementing the direction of the DC Circuit, vacating the biological opinion as to lobster and Jonah crab, and remanding the 2021 MMPA rule back to the agency without vacating it. At this point, the plaintiffs have filed petitions for an award of attorney's fees. That will be the next and last issue to be resolved in this case. So this case is close to the finish line. The other big fisheries right whale case, the CBD CLF case in the District of Columbia. This case has a long history going back to 2018. But at this point, we have a merits ruling in the district court on the 2021 biological opinion and take reduction plan rule, which the court had set a schedule for a new requiring a new rule to be issued by December of 2024. Subsequently, Congress added provisions to the 2023 Consolidated Appropriations Act that basically said the 2021 rule satisfied the requirements of the ESA and MMPA. That's shorthand for what the provisions of the act did. In light of those provisions of law in the DC Circuit ruling in the MLA case that I just talked about, NIMS has filed a motion to dismiss the case. And that motion is fully briefed and we're waiting for a decision by the court. And then finally, I'll report on the now 2 cases before the Supreme Court that NIMS is a party to, and that is the Loper Bright case and the Relentless case. Loper Bright, they're both challenging the New England Council's industry-funded monitoring amendment. In both cases, NIMS won in the district court and in the circuit court. Loper Bright was in the DC Circuit, and Relentless was in the First Circuit. Started off in the District Court of Rhode Island. You may recall that the Supreme Court granted review of the Loper Bright case. That case is fully briefed, and the court has scheduled oral argument for January 17th. Subsequently, the plaintiffs in the Relentless case sought review of the First Circuit decision, and the Supreme Court granted that since our last meeting. And at this point, briefing is still underway. It will be completed by January 5th. And oral argument is scheduled for January 17th as well, the same day. I presume they'll be back to back. So both cases are going to be argued on January 17th. Circle it on your calendar and see if you can tune in to the Supreme Court page and listen to the argument. And that is all I have for my update. I'll be happy to answer any questions if I can. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Any questions or comments, John? Chris Moore?
John, in reference to that NRDC case, when you went through a timeline, I missed the last part. So you said by the middle of February, all the paper has to be where it needs to be. Final ruling expected.
That's kind of a black box. The court can issue a ruling quickly. It could take a year. So I can't really say with any educated prediction when the court will rule. All we know is we'll have it briefed on the merits by February 16th.
Any more questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you, John. Let's go to our NOAA Office of Law Enforcement, Caleb Gilbert. Caleb, if you're talking, we can't hear you. And it looks like you're still muted on your end. All right, I'll come back to you. Let's give the U.S. Coast Guard report, Lieutenant Commander Matt Cayley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Good morning from the Coast Guard. From the Coast Guard over the past 2 months, October, November, we conducted 62 fisheries enforcement boardings. Of those, they were primarily in the HMS, summer flounder, black sea bass, and squid fisheries, and mostly on the commercial sector. Of the boardings that we did, we had 3 violations or 3 enforcement action reports that we issued. One was from the Steelhead operating off of North Carolina on a patrol. They boarded a charter boat that was engaged in fishing for amberjack without having a dehooking or descending device on board. And then the cutter Heron out of Cape May was operating off of New Jersey, and they issued 2 enforcement action reports to 2 recreational vessels on the 29th of November and the 30th of November for having Atlantic striped bass being in possession of 2 fish that were in the EEZ. We've had no marine protected species support requests over the past 2 months. And from the operations side, we're currently engaged in 2 operations. One is Operation Stars and Stripers, which is targeting vessels that are fishing for Atlantic striped bass in the EEZ from New Jersey to Virginia once they migrate down. And then we're also engaged in Operation Right Speed, which focuses on ensuring boats that are 65 feet or greater are compliant with seasonal management areas of entering and leaving ports within our district. And so far, we've conducted 6 hail outs for vessels that were violating the speed restriction in November, mostly out of the Delaware Bay area. On the commercial fishing vessel safety front, we've conducted 57 exams and we've issued 42 decals. And we've had 2 commercial fishing vessel voyage terminations. One was from 8 November, where a fishing vessel, Herndon, was boarded by a station boat up in Oxford. And while they were underway, engaged in fishing for oysters in the Chesapeake Bay, their voyage was terminated because they didn't have the required safety gear on board. And then we did our cutter sailfish in 28 November, boarded Joker's Wild that was targeting oysters again in the Chesapeake Bay, and their voyage was terminated for not having the required safety gear on board. We also had a grounding during this period. Station Manasquan Inlet up in New Jersey responded to a report of a 30-foot fishing boat, the Susan Rose. It was grounded off the inlet there in Manasquan with 4 people on board. One of the persons was able to make it to land, and the Point Pleasant Fire Department dive team was able to get the remaining people off with no major injuries. And then lastly, our commercial fishing vessel outreach efforts. They continue to do dock walks and training, educational efforts for our units for the safety side. And that's all I have, pending any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Peter Hughes?
Thanks. Thanks for your report, Lieutenant Commander. You said that there were 6 vessels found in violation of the speed restrictions coming out of Delaware Bay area. Do you know how many vessels the overall sample is? Is it 6 out of 1,000 vessels? I mean, what's the compliance rate look like? And maybe this isn't a question for you. Maybe this is a question for NOAA. What's the compliance rate look like on this? You know, we get notices relatively often, sometimes multiple times a week, that, you know, we're shutting this area. This area is now. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what the compliance rate looks like. Is that 6 out of 100 vessels, 6 out of 1,000 vessels, 6 out of 5,000 vessels? There's a lot of traffic coming in and out of there. Just curiosity, that's all.
Sure. Yeah, it's a tough question to ask just because of the volume that's going in and out of Delaware Bay. From my experience working up there, we might have anywhere from 10 to 15 deep draft arrivals coming in and out of the port going through the channel. But then you also have the other vessels that aren't, you know, deep draft and calling on the ports that, you know, that have a potential to violate that speed restriction. So, I mean, 6 in November, we hail out to them when we see them, but, you know, I'm sure there are some that we miss, and it's really difficult to say, you know, without having a daily count of how many vessels that fit that requirement are going through that zone to be able to say, like, hey, this is the exact percentage.
Peter? And then this might be a follow-up to NOAA, that is there any kind of report like that so that you can track compliance? Because, you know, they're right whale speed restriction areas, and just there's a lot of vessel activity.
Down here.
Thank you. Yeah, NOAA, it's the Office of Protected Resources, recently in October released a dashboard that shows vessel speed compliance. So I'll share that with Dr. Moore, and he can share it with everybody here.
Matt, one quick question. Is a speed check, I guess by AIS? I know NOAA enforcement has radar, but I don't think Coast Guard does, do they?
We predominantly use the AIS to enforce it, unless we have a cutter that's in the area that we have to get on radar that we see that are going the speed restriction, or they're exceeding the speed restrictions, and we'll hail out to them. But yeah, we're predominantly using within our command centers AIS to enforce that with the geofence set up around the area.
Thank you. Any more questions? Scott?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the report out, Matt. You stole my question about AIS. Appreciate that. We have a little bit of overlap now off of our coast. I'm sure they do off of the New Jersey coast as well, with some bluefin activity that's happening. Have intercept officers been given any overall, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Have they been given any instructions on what happens when they're intercepting guys that are also encountering striped bass in those areas. Yes, more specifically like gear that they're using, that sort of thing.
So we're not, when we go out and we're mainly looking, we're enforcing, since it's federal, we're enforcing the EEZ violations. So when we're out patrolling, we're mostly at 3 and beyond, and we're looking for vessels that are out there that are fishing for, striped bass. And if they have them on board, it's a pretty easy violation for us to write, because it's, it's pretty clear on whether or not you're allowed to catch, striped bass within the EEZ. So if they don't have them on board, sometimes we'll try to educate them on, hey, this is, if they're right along the line, but the ones that are egregious when they're pretty far over the line, those are the ones that we, generally will write a violation for.
Appreciate that. Yeah. So I guess I haven't heard any complaints from anybody, but it sounds like they're actually using their bluefin tuna fishing, and some of the striped bass are eating ballyhoo and things like that. So I guess if they're catching them as bycatch in the bluefin tuna fishery that they're taking advantage of, as long as they don't keep them on board, they're okay.
Yeah, one of the things we look at is what they're primarily targeting. And if they're primarily targeting bluefin tuna and they happen to catch one, and we're happen to be there. I mean, if we come on board and they have one on board and they're over 3, then we consider that a violation. But if it's something that they caught as a bycatch, we would just expect them to throw it back. And we've done that too for fish that are alive that are on board, that have been caught in the EEZ. We'll just advise them to get rid of them, and we'll document it, and then that typically results in a kind of a compliance assistance there.
Any more questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you very much. Let's circle back and see if we have Caleb Gilbert. Are you on now? Office of Law Enforcement.
Can you hear me now, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, you sound great.
Oh, fantastic. I won't try to call in on my cell phone again. My apologies. Good morning, council members. So for my report today, North Atlantic right whale conservation and observer program support continue to be our top 2 priorities for Office of Law Enforcement in the Northeast Division. We also released our 5-year law enforcement priorities document. It includes a complete comprehensive list of our nationwide and regional enforcement priorities. We included a link to that document in our 4th quarter written report prepared for this meeting that I saw that Mary posted up on the council agenda. I appreciate that, Mary. As usual, most of the information I will report to you this morning relates to our top 2 priorities. So starting with our enforcement efforts allocated towards right whale conservation, those continue to be split between Atlantic large whale take reduction plan and speed rule enforcement. On the take reduction plan side, our patrol-based compliance rate continues to climb. Out of about, I realize this is all more Northeast focused, but out of about 342 vessels whose gear was inspected in the 4th quarter FY23, 313 had no observed take reduction plan violations. And that pushed our observed compliance rate up to 93%, which was up from 87% in the previous quarter, quarter 3. As usual, Maine Marine Patrol conducts the majority of the take reduction plan patrols. Also, take reduction plan related, there are a couple of ropeless or on-demand fishing workshops that OLE staff participated in recently. And this is in the current 1st quarter FY24. First, Office of Law Enforcement, U.S. Coast Guard, D1, New Hampshire Sea Grant, Garfo, and center staff all collaborated to host a ropeless gear workshop for federal enforcement partners that included U.S. Coast Guard D5 at the end of October. This event started with a morning classroom session at the Otis Joint Enforcement Base out on Cape Cod. It was followed by an afternoon field demonstration on the docks in Sandwich and just offshore. I'm happy to talk more about that. I was also invited to update the New England Fishery Management Council's on-demand working group on the workshop at their next meeting on Monday. So folks listening in today that might be participating in that meeting can hear more about the workshop then. A couple of us from OLE also participated in the joint U.S.-Canada Ropeless Interoperability Workshop held 2 weeks ago in Woburn, Mass. And it was good to see a couple of our Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council colleagues at that event. Moving on to speed enforcement that I know folks had just touched on. Our enforcement efforts continue along similar paths to what we've reported at prior council meetings. Last week, we conducted a speed enforcement operation in the New York, New Jersey seasonal management area. Vessel speed was 100% compliant among all vessels checked for speed during that op. Overall, NOAA's assessed just over $1 million in civil penalties across 61 cases processed since 2022. Speed rule case processing for the 22-23 SMA season continues. As we've reported previously, recreational and pleasure craft continued to be the largest group we observed to be out of compliance with speed rule requirements. We're working to complement our case processing with outreach and education to help enhance compliance. And along those lines, earlier this month, investigative support program staff in the Northeast Division sent out 111 notifications, compliance assistance letters to vessel owners domestically and internationally for minor violations of the right whale speed rule. Moving on to our observer priority, our observer liaison special agent ended the fourth quarter FY23 having participated in a total of 3 new observer training classes, including the at-sea monitor safety panel discussions, and now accompany those trainings. I'll direct you to the page 9 of our written report for more details on our efforts in support of this priority. We also continue to work on enforcement outside of our core priorities, notably the 3-week trial of U.S. versus Chris Winkler, the fishing vessel New Age, that began on Monday, September 11th in the Eastern District of New York. That concluded with a guilty verdict on all 5 counts charged, 1 count conspiracy, 2 counts of mail fraud, and 2 counts of obstruction. And there's a U.S. Department of Justice press release for more information on the trial. Related to blue line and tile fish enforcement, we've continued our efforts, but I don't believe there are any newly closed cases to report on since the October meeting in New York. But I'll check again on this topic before the next meeting and continue to report out as I'm able. I also want to touch briefly today on the topic of emerging technologies and enforcement. We continue to prioritize advancing our speed rule enforcement capabilities. I know we mentioned AIS just now, but we also use radar, as I think Lieutenant Commander Cayley just mentioned. In addition to the 1M2 mobile radar unit, that's a land-based unit that I think I've reported to the council in the past that we began operating last year. We've begun the procurement process for the purchase of 2 new additional M2 mobile radar units. And similar along those lines, similar to maybe others in the room today, I'm looking forward to seeing which spending proposals are approved to protect North Atlantic right whales as part of money directed to be money directed under the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act. I don't have any more information that's what's provided on our web's page or any kind of timeline, but a big chunk, $5 million of the Inflation Reduction Act funds are designated to improve enforcement through equipment purchases and improved outreach. And our investigation of emerging technologies is, more or less continual. One instance, a special agent recently attended a training and demonstration by a aerospace company on the operation and capabilities of I guess it's an Edge 130 aerial drone. And the last item I'll mention today is that our D1 Senior Enforcement Officer, David Testaverde, retired last month after 37 years of service protecting living marine resources. In addition to his service to OLE, he spent 20 years with the U.S. Coast Guard and a number more with Maine Marine Patrol. Our Division II SEO, Roy Fisher, is covering our D1 SEO responsibilities, and we have plans to rotate acting D1 SEO responsibility among our EOs once Roy finishes with his efforts there until former SEO Testaverde's post has been permanently backfilled. And that concludes my report today, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to take any questions if folks have them.
Any questions or comments for Caleb? Seeing none, thank you very much for the report.
No problem.
Let us move on to liaison reports. New England Council, Peter Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is my liaison report from the New England Fishery Management Council that took place last week in Newport, Rhode Island. The skate committee report, the council updated the specifications to OFL equals unknown, ABC equals ACL equals 32,155 metric tons. But you have to understand there's two parts to this fishery. There's a wing towel, which is 10,453 metric tons, and a bait towel, which is 5,266 metric tons. When addressing the fishery possession limits, the council recommended two preferred alternatives: an increase in the wing possession limits for trips fishing on days at sea to 4,000 pounds for season 1 and 6,000 pounds for season 2. Also, an increase to wing possession limits by 25% on trips not on a day at sea to 625 pounds on a Northeast multi-species B day at sea to 220 pounds. And they also took measures to remove the barn door skate possession restriction and remove the smooth skate possession restriction. The Scallop Committee report, the council updated the Scallop OFL and ABCs for 2024 and 2025. They also took action to close Platts Bank to directed scallop fishing within the Northern Gulf of Maine for 2 years. They set the Northern Gulf of Maine TAL at 454,152 pounds and the Northern Gulf of Maine set aside at 400,259 pounds, including a 2025 default Northern Gulf of Maine set aside of 315,449 pounds. The council set the fishery specifications for full-time limited access vessels at 20 days at sea and 3 access area trips with 12,000 pound limits. This allocates the following access area trips and days at sea to full-time permit holders at 2 trips in closed area 2 and 1 trip in the New York Bight, each at 12,000 pound trip limit and 20 days at sea. The council also took action to update the limited access general category IFQ access area trip allocation that would allow access to area 1, area 2, and the New York Bight, and allocate 856 trips for the limited access general category IFQ fishery in 2024. This is of particular interest to me, might also be of interest to you. The council also moved to select a 5-minute VMS reporting rate when a scallop vessel crosses seaward of the VMS demarcation line on a scallop declaration code. This would likely be implemented between April and June of 2024. And you kind of heard some of the reasoning for that yesterday. In regards to groundfish, the council took action to revise specifications, including the OFL and ABC, the recommendations of the SSC to remove the management uncertainty buffer for sectors for certain allocated stocks if the at-sea monitoring target coverage rate is at 90% or greater for both the whitehake and the Gulf of Maine haddock fisheries. They took action to modify the trigger for implementing Atlantic halibut accountability measures, and they temporarily modified a trigger for the Atlantic sea scallop accountability measures implementation policy for Georges Bank yellowtail flounder. The council also reviewed and modified and finalized their 2024 priorities. I do have a bit of an EBFM update, but I think I'm going to turn to my left to my counterpart to help explain that a little bit more thoroughly than I can. So Eric, are you locked and loaded?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, when we had, our EBFM process it's been a pretty lengthy process. I mean, I've been on the council for 8 years and change, and I was on that committee when I started, and they're still dealing with it. And, it's a really complicated issue. And, the reality of it is the EBFM development probably take another couple of years to get it where it's where we can look at it for real. So what the council did under priorities, we had a lengthy, actually, I think the EBFM discussion on the one priority was longer than the entire priorities discussion, so we had a lengthy process, which was really, refreshing, to be honest with you. But the direction the council is going to take now is we're going to take advantage of, the knowledge we've gained over a very lengthy EBFM process, and we're going to redirect the focus to look at ways to incorporate the knowledge in management over the short term. The EBFM process itself is not going away, but we're gonna take a little pause, and we're gonna try to adapt a lot of knowledge that we've gained to current management practices. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I think that's the gist of it.
Then that concludes my report.
All right, thank you. Chris Moore?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I was surprised to hear that you guys are dropping EBFM, and it sounds like you're moving towards EAFM. Is that something they talked about?
I mean, that's basically what we're doing. We're not dropping EBFM. We're just redirecting that focus in showing some results from that. EBFM is not, we didn't make it disappear off the face of the earth, doctor, but right now we're gonna try to put it to some use. I mean, it's been a long process, and there's really been a tremendous amount of work on EBFM. So we have a lot of things that we've learned. So we want to put them to use. And then once we can get through that, we'll most likely pick up EBFM maybe in late 2024, maybe in 2025.
Michelle Duval?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Reed, for the additional information. I hope to tune into the priorities discussion, and unfortunately, you all were so efficient that you were adjourning the meeting by the time I logged on. So I guess just a bit more of a specific question. So Adam Nowalski and I both serve on that committee for the Mid-Atlantic Council. So there were a series of deep dive workshops that were being planned. So are those no longer going to take place?
Yeah, that's correct. But we're not, I mean, that we weren't, the content of those deep dive workshops really wasn't fully developed. So the timeline was too aggressive for that. So instead of dedicating all that time, we're taking a little different tack, which I described already. But, if in fact the EBFM committee is ready in late 2024, we can always pick it back up in. We'd have to change our priorities, which is a 2/3 vote, but that doesn't mean it is totally out the window. But, right now we're going to devote our energy in a different manner. I guess that's a proper way to say it. So.
Any more questions, comments? Thank you, Peter and Eric. Go to our South Atlantic Council report. Tom, isn't it nice to be to a meeting and not talk about red snapper?
Unfortunately, I'm going to talk about red snappers.
I tried to get you away from it.
I appreciate that. So for those of you who have not met me, my name is Tom Roller. I'm a council member from North Carolina, and I'm a full-time for hire fisherman in my regular life. I'm going to go here and just go over the report from our last meeting. So the South Atlantic Fisheries Management Council met in my hometown of beautiful Beaufort, North Carolina last week, December 4th through 8th. So one of the most salient issues we discussed at the council was regarding our for hire permits on several different layers. The first is we continue to hear from our advisory panels, particularly the coastal migratory pelagics, which is king, Spanish mackerel, and cobia off the Atlantic coast of Florida, and our snapper grouper AP, that they really want to see for limited entry into for hire fisheries, and they've been telling us this for years. The Southeast Regional Office staff gave us an update and report on our for hire integrated electronic reporting program, which we refer to as CFIRE, showing us that we had extremely poor compliance in this required program. even less than 50% as it's been in place for 2 years. And the discussion really went around what do we need to do to drive compliance in this fishery being as open access, right? So the council discussed this at length, and in the end, one of the things we did, we voted to start an amendment to look at limited entry in all 3 of our for hire permits, which are the 2 I mentioned previous, as well as our dolphin wahoo fishery. We also added an additional control date and are also looking at ways in which we can drive compliance and get better data through this program, which is greatly needed by the for hire sector. Our next items are some of the stuff under our grouper snapper, snapper grouper amendments and projects. The first is our private recreational reporting permit, which is Amendment 46. What we're looking to do is create a recreational permit for all people fishing in that complex of fisheries. We've had a lot of debate on this. Still have a lot of questions we need to answer, but we're really just trying to better define the universe of people that target these primarily offshore fisheries. A couple of the things we did is we did pick some preferred options, one of which is we're looking more at an individual-based permit instead of a vessel permit. And we also want the permit to be required to fish for all species in the snapper grouper management complex. Obviously, this has been a long discussion about that. It's not as simple as what would look the best, right? It also has to mesh with a lot of the existing state programs like the Florida Reef Fish Survey. Another thing we did is we created a private recreational ad hoc advisory panel filled with different elements of the purely recreational fishermen to try to get their feedback on this amendment as we move forward. We did an amendment on yellowtail snapper, which is Amendment 44. That's mostly a South Florida and Gulf fishery, so you can read a little bit about that more in the report. Next is our scamp and yellowmouth grouper, Amendment 55. What's interesting about this amendment is these are 2 species that have similar life history, and there's a lot of ID issues between them. They were assessed as an individual species, which created some issues. First of all, the fishery is not doing well. It's not an overfishing issue, though. It's a lack of recruitment in the fishery, something we're seeing in a lot of other fisheries. So whether it's climate or whatnot, we're seeing big changes, and we're going to see some big reductions in this fishery going forward. But what that required us to do is change one of our complexes. We had to pull. We've got a lot of different finfish species in this complex. We had to pull yellowmouth grouper out, add them with scamp, and create a couple new complexes. One we're referring to as Scamp and Friends, which we find very funny, and the other South Atlantic shallow water grouper complex, which we're referring to as Oceawags. So if you listen to our meetings and you wonder what we're talking about, that's what it's about. The next one is red snapper. This was a big issue for the council. After a lot of discussion out of a regulatory amendment 35, the council rescinded its approval to submit the amendment for formal review. This was not taken very lightly, and we had a lot of discussion on this. The best way to understand that is in the South Atlantic, we don't have a red snapper fishery. We have a grouper snapper complex fishery in which red snapper are caught. The main issue with red snapper are discards in this fishery, particularly recreational. As a council, we have struggled to find ways to reduce those discards without greatly impacting the entire fishery at large. We have a long-term solution, which is an MSC program. And we're also doing a midterm solution, which are individual state EFPs, which are down the line. We as a council decided to relook at what we had in this amendment and try to offer something more immediate at a different time. The next issue was Regulatory Amendment 36. These are 2 different issues. This is gag and black grouper recreational vessel limits and on-demand sea bass pots, also known as ropeless gear. The reason gag and black grouper recreational vessel limits are included is this is just to correct an error in the codified text from our last gag and black grouper amendment, which was just approved and put in place. As we moved from an individual to a vessel limit, there was a couple errors, and we aimed to correct that. Regarding the on-demand black sea bass pots, so basically, we had an EFP that allowed people to fish with these, and I'll just read from here. The council also added consideration of accommodating on-demand black sea bass pots based on positive perspectives from fishermen that have experimentally used these types of gear under an ongoing EFP. The council approved this amendment for scoping and directed the staff communicate with black sea bass pot endorsement holders, particularly those that participated in the EFP project, asking which types of on-demand gear they would want to be available for use. Scoping will help determine how we go forward with this and accommodate this gear across the fishery. So the next one is one of our big issues currently, which is our coastal migratory pelagics amendment projects, which is mostly Spanish mackerel, but obviously also includes king mackerel. Whenever I talk about this, and I do recognize I'm a chair of this committee, but it's important to remember how important these fisheries are to our council. Commercially, as far as fin fish, they're the first and second in pounds landed and first and third in ex-vessel value. And recreationally, they're second and third in directed trips. So they're very important to our coast. First thing is to back up a little bit. We had a stock assessment on Spanish mackerel, which was not deemed useful for management, only useful for give it with discussion or SSC for just determining new catch levels. So what we did was we decided to go forward with a framework amendment, which was Framework Amendment 13, to update the catch levels, moving from CHTS to FES. We were moving forward with this, but as we started to get analysis of it, so it's important to remember under a framework, we can't adjust commercial and recreational allocations. But going from CHTS to FES, we have a paper increase in recreational catch, but we have a real fish increase in the commercial side of things. This was going to lead to us to have recreational closures in the fisheries, specifically bag limit reductions when we were going to go over, which was predicted almost every year. So after a lot of discussion and it looked like the need to add a lot more stuff onto this amendment, we decided to move it off the work plan and suspend work on it. And this kind of goes into the next issue. One of the reasons is we're going to be conducting a series of port meetings over the King and the CMP, or the King and Spanish mackerel fishery, from the Gulf all the way through New England. And we're going to be starting a new amendment in 2025. And it just became clear to us that it didn't make sense for us to do this small fix right now when we really need to look at a more bigger fix here in just a year. So the port meetings are something that, as advisory panel and the councils wanted to do for a long time. Spanish mackerel, king mackerel are climate impacted species. They are moving north at great speed and becoming of much more importance to fishermen up and down the coast. So we began to work on a plan to conduct these port meetings and give a better comprehensive understanding of these fisheries, to see how they're being utilized by what fishermen in the different sectors. And this is going to actually help us look into our next full amendment for these fisheries. I'm going to just tell you some of the port meetings here, because they are going to be in this region, and that South Atlantic Council has been working with staff from the commission and all the other councils in getting these placed forward. So the meetings are going to be held in 2024, and here were in the Mid-Atlantic. I'll get to it in a second. So the meetings are going to be in April in North Carolina. We're going to do 4 meetings: Wilmington, North Carolina, Morehead City, Hatteras, and Wanchese. In May will be our New England meetings, which were originally slated to be looking at Montauk, New London, Newport, and Barnstable. Barnstable. I'm never going to pronounce that correctly. I'm from North Carolina. Feedback we did get from the council and the commission were to consider New Bedford and Point Judith as alternative locations. The Mid-Atlantic locations we're looking at are going to be in August. We're looking at Virginia Beach, Ocean City, Lewes, and Cape May. Further feedback and discussion at the council was we should maybe consider a central New Jersey location as opposed to Cape May. So we're looking for feedback on that. These are going to be really important as we look to this, climate impacted fisheries. So we're all looking to the Mid-Atlantic Council and the New England Council to help drive participation in these meetings and help us hear from more fishermen. So got a couple other items left. Next one is our citizen science. We looked at all the priorities and went over those and adjusted those. One of the big issues is we have an app we created, which we call SciFish, which we've been used to getting just volunteer submitted data, and it's been pretty successful in our region. But our staff worked with the ACCSP to create an app that is a blank template. So any partners with them can go, if they need to get a date, if they're looking to do any sort of, if there's an issue they need to get data from fishermen, you can use their app, and you can customize it to do anything. So this is, and this, what's really cool about this is eliminates one of those, trying to find my words here, but this eliminates one of those, the usually expensive and time consuming steps when we're trying to do a program like that. A couple other items, we did our allocation review guidelines, and the council developed allocation review guidelines that outline the council's process for allocation reviews, including an allocation decision tool process, the updated allocation review trigger policy, and the types of information that will be documented following an allocation trigger and subsequent review. And we approved those guidelines at this meeting. The last item is, which I think is a really neat thing we're doing, we're starting a program for stakeholder engagement meetings with council members. Council staff has begun work to develop a plan for holding stakeholder engagement meetings along the South Atlantic coast, meeting fishermen in their communities. The traditional public comment format does not always allow for two-way discourse between council members and fisheries stakeholders. These stakeholders engagement meetings will provide an opportunity for council members to have productive dialogues with fisheries participants. By engaging stakeholders in this more informal setting, council members will be able to build relationships and increase engagement in the management process. And this has been pretty enthusiastically received by our council. We view this as an initiative, as a means to facilitate better communication and engagement with our fishing communities, help stakeholders get a better understanding of the process, and provide a mechanism for stakeholders to bring their concerns and observations forward directly to council members, as well as vice versa. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I'm going to conclude my report unless there's any questions.
Thank you very much, Tom. Any questions, comments? Michelle Duval.
Thanks, Tom, for the report. So when would you all expect like sort of dates to be set for those mackerel court meetings?
Good question. I would refer to my staff lead on that. We're working on that now because we have the month, but we're looking now at the venue and we're working with people on that. So we've got those for, the relevant ones here, April, May, and August, which are the ones I listed. And we also have a whole slate of Florida meetings as well.
Chris Pat Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the report, Tom. With red snapper, since the council's not moving forward with Amendment 35, what's going to be the status for the ABCs and ACLs for red snapper? Are they going to be what was already in place, or is NIPS going to try to put in the lower ABCs recommended from the last stock assessment in lieu of a plan amendment?
Oh, thank you for that question, Chris. I don't know. I'm not sure we thought that far ahead at this point. I want to say that I think the previous ones are in place, but who's to say? I think that's going to be immediate discussion going forward.
Any more questions? Sonny?
Yeah, thank you for that report, Tom. But I think I mentioned this, that you have a meeting in Ocean City in August. And I kind of suggested Berlin because Ocean City in August is tough getting a venue down there. So just for.
I would ask that you reach out to Christina, the macro lead, and maybe send her an email on that. That would be really helpful.
Okay, thank you.
And that may be in, I'll look at the committee report. That might be in there. I'm not sure.
Seeing no more hands, thank you very much, Tom. At this time, do we have any more other business or general comments to bring before the council? Eric?
Yeah, just a comment, thanks as always, and everybody have a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holiday, and see you next year.
All right, with that, I'd like to thank the council staff for another great meeting. You guys make my life easy up here. Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy holidays, and see everybody in Arlington, Virginia in February. Thank you.